Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Couch Confidentials. Today I have Neill Brookman with me, and whoever says that Martech or the data world is not a small world, it definitely is. Neill and I go way back. I don't think we've actively collaborated on certain projects where the paths definitely crossed at some point when you were working at T-Leaf or when he was working at T-Leaf. And that's kind of where a lot of my interest around customer experience grew. And today he is here to talk about MetaRouter. I don't want to say the odd one in the bunch. It might be the powerful one in the whole CDP landscape at the moment, which is going through a lot of turmoil and changes. So I'm very curious to hear what the differences are around CDP and CDI and get to know the platform just a little bit better. So it's going to be a mix between Couch Confidentials and the demo. Welcome, Neill. It's been a long time coming, but thank you for taking the time to join me today.
My pleasure. Good to see you again.
Yeah, I was trying to think back. I think it's 15 years the last time I ever touched T-Leaf. For those of you who don't know, T-Leaf was, and correct me if I'm wrong, because my memory is kind of flaky after the operation on my wrist. T-Leaf was a server-hosted customer experience solution that was able to tap the interactions. So all the HTTP requests going back and forth between the website and the user. So it was tagless. To a certain extent, and then everything could be collected and analyzed within the T-Leaf suite, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, so effectively a session replay tool that hooked in to physical network packets, which with everything in the cloud now, I think would struggle. But in those days when you had physical servers deploying websites, you hook in, capture the packets, decrypt them, and then have full session replay.
Yeah.
It was a clever technology.
Oh, it definitely was, but they still exist. They actually, I think the whole software got acquired by a company called Acoustic, and they're still running T-Leaf, probably a cloud-hosted service at this moment. But I think it was very ahead of its time at the day.
Yeah, and the benefit was it was tagless, whereas now you have to deploy a tag. So it's more client-side sending packets across rather than hooking into the network. So platform has changed. A few competitors out there now as well.
Yeah, and but I've also noticed that you've worked for a few of those competitors as well. I've seen that your journey has taken you through the hallways of Lytics and of, if I remember correctly, treasure data.
That's right. Yeah,
how has that affected? I mean, was that kind of all in preparation for the work that you're doing now at MetaRouter, that you took the CDP route?
I mean, I moved into it sort of, I was going to say by accident. That's not strictly true. So I worked at a company called Gigia for a number of years. And that was a customer identity access management or a CIAM platform. And we were pretty much selling it as a CDP. And this was in 2011, before CDPs existed, because we were talking about sort of storing data on all of your users and centralizing it, having single sign-on, but then all of the behavioral data as well. So that's where I've sort of pushed that. And then I moved to a couple of competitors of Gigia. One of them was called Janrain, who then got acquired by Akamai. So moved into the sort of that space, and then all of the leadership of get all the names out of Janrain then moved across to Lytics because they were both based in Portland, and they persuaded me to join. So that got me into the CDP space, and I'd sort of been talking the talk track for a number of years anyway with CIAM and profile storage and behavioral data, and then from there I moved on to treasure data, and then from treasure data on to where I am now at MetaRouter or MetaRouter as we call it in the UK.
That's right, yeah. So actually, you've kind of come back. You've come full circle now. If you're looking at the experiences you had before Lytics and treasure data.
That's right. And I mean, CDPs. I mean, most of your listeners will know what a CDP is, and CDPs, just like any other technology, are only as good as the data that's collected. And treasure data, as an example, very, very powerful at centralizing data. I still think one of the most powerful CDPs on the market. But where do you get that data from? And they have a tag, and most CDPs have a tag, but that's not the sort of forefront of the technology. It's the data storage and processing that's the key. The tags are just a way to get data. But at MetaRouter, we're able to just uplift that data and all of the signals coming through and to send into CDP. So just getting a much richer, much wider, better quality data set in CDP to unlock. That's the bit that attracted me at MetaRouter, is the sort of the depth and breadth of data that we can get, and just working with all of the CDPs. And the fact that I've worked at a few in my career, it's nice to now be agnostic and just see the big wide landscape and the differences across the market.
I can imagine, yeah, and I definitely hope that a lot of the listeners do know what a CDP is. But MetaRouter labels itself as a CDI. Could you what are some of the key differences between a CDP and a CDI? The acronym stands for Customer Data Infrastructure.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's CDI isn't really a category, so it's something that we're sort of
Be happy
pushing.
that's not a category, because all this labeling is getting out of hand.
And no, exactly, and we're sort of going to be pushing that quite heavily as a category. But yeah, customer data platform, or CDP, is around sort of building a customer 360, using the data machine learning algorithms to do activation, whether it's anonymous or known. CDI, or customer data infrastructure, it's all about getting customer data from digital touch points to end systems. So CDP is one data warehouse, sending data down to all of your ad platforms, your ad networks, your performance tools, your analytics tools. So just shifting that customer data from, let's say, web and mobile in real time downstream. So sits very much left of a CDP.
Mm-hmm.
So a CDP is a target. A CDI doesn't do data storage. It's effectively a pipelining tool to send all of those events in real time and get the events there with the right quality. I always sort of talk about sort of all of the AI that we have now and all of the machine learning, that they're only as good as the data that's being captured.
Yeah. I think that's what everyone's saying at the moment, indeed, is that, and it's been a red thread through our lives in the industry for over 15 years. All I hear is data quality is poor.
Exactly. And as a good example, just look at all the fake news that's around on social and the internet. And if ChatGPT or Gemini are pulling all of these bits of information in, how are the algorithms going to know that that's fake news? So they're going to be giving sort of factual information when it's incorrect. And I always say, for anyone that's using sort of an AI tool or machine learning tool, you need to understand the basics. If you don't know anything, you're just going to agree with the messaging that's been sent out, which could be wildly inaccurate if the sources are wrong. So as a CDI, we're just making sure not just the sort of data quality as such, but making sure you're removing anything that shouldn't be there. So making sure you haven't got that negative data set that's skewing all of your algorithms.
And interesting, you said the CDI, or in this case, MetaRouter or router, sits to the left of the CDP. So it sits more on the source end of the platform. Does that mean it doesn't get in? You still leave room for the CDP's own features to distribute that data? Or are you like an extra layer of quality control in between the data that's coming in before it's being distributed to a CDP?
Yeah, so the latter. And the other thing with CDPs, so most CDPs are like multi-tenant SaaS solutions, and their tag is delivered through the CDP CDN. So if you're putting treasure data on, you set the tag from cdn.treasuredata.com, whatever it may be. And ad blockers are actually blocking a number of the CDP tags. And if you just use an ad blocker, and even if you go to like Zeotap, go to their website, all of the CSS and JavaScript is blocked by the ad blocker, so you can't even navigate their website with an ad blocker. So the challenge you have is that CDPs talk about their tag. We store first-party cookies with first-party, but any user with an ad blocker is blocking their tag from running. So you don't actually have that ID dropped, you don't have a cookie dropped, and no data is being collected. But due to the nature of CDIs and MetaRouter in particular, we're fully first-party end-to-end. So we're deployed in private cloud, typically within a customer's own environment. So you set up a record in DNS pointing at the dedicated cluster, and that IP is going to be in the same subnet as all of your internal systems. So as far as browser restrictions and ad blockers are concerned, it's an internal piece of technology.
Yep.
So that means we're
Goes
able
beyond
to...
the CNAME cloaking that usually happens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also, because we are fully server side, so if you have an existing data layer, you can just send the data to us server side. So you can be completely tagless on the website and not have any impact. And if you're using our JavaScript SDK, that's deployed in a customer's own CDN or directly in the website. So that's seen as a first-party script as well. So we're able to see an uplift of data going into CDP and to other tools as well. We have a case study with a large US retailer that they're seeing 300% more events going to Pinterest by moving to MetaRouter than using the tag itself. Pinterest are actually pushing their customers to use us because they're seeing that increased signal. So
that's interesting. Yeah.
That's a big challenge. And another sort of example I use is if you're using Facebook ads as an example, and somebody clicks through an ad into your website, Facebook is tracking the click because they do that before they redirect you. But if a user has an ad blocker, the Facebook tag is never firing to send a conversion event. So you're increasing your ad spend because you're not sending enough signal. If you do everything server side, then the events can still be sent. So we're seeing that uplift in events being sent down to Facebook CAPI, Pinterest CAPI, Snapchat, all of the others by doing it server side with a CDI, which then in turn improves your ROAS because your ad spend is going down, your conversion rates are up, and your cost per click is going down as well.
Yeah. But is it safe to say, and I don't know if this is a topic for this discussion, but it sounds like you're not as you mentioned, you're completely different than a CDP. That's a fact.
Yes.
What does that do in terms of pricing, though? I mean, it sounds very interesting as an interesting solution that people should see as maybe an add-on to their current customer data platform, a solution that they're using. And also another something completely off topic with Unifor buying ActionIQ. This sounds, what you guys are doing sounds like a solution that is definitely going to be drawing a lot of attention from mergers and acquisition. So
definitely.
There are a lot of things going on there. I mean, in terms of pricing, I can't imagine it being at the same price level. I mean, is that true?
Yes, and we are private cloud only. We have two options. So we can host on behalf of a customer. So we would typically in our GCP, we would spin up a dedicated cluster and manage everything. So on that, there's a certain pricing model, but we can also deploy in a customer's own environment across GCP, AWS, or Azure, and then they just pay all of the utilization to the cloud platform. So all of the event processing, all of the hosting
is separate from the licensing, yeah.
So they're then able to utilize their discounts and their drawdown to manage all of that. But one thing that makes us unique, so we have patented technology in our platform called Sync Injector. And what that allows us to do is when somebody first hits a customer's website, we do an asynchronous call out to all of the third-party vendors that they're using. So if you think Facebook, Snapchat, Pinterest, and others, we then get the IDs back
with
from them.
With consent, of course.
With full consent. So we do consent enforcement, so I can cover that as well. So we do that asynchronous call out and we get the IDs back from those vendors, and the IDs are exactly the same IDs that their tags and pixels would deploy in a first party cookie. We do it in a first party context. And what that means is we allow people to remove all of those tags and pixels from the website. So rather than having 50 tags running on the website, you just have one tag that collects everything, and we then send those events server side. And by removing those tags, that increases page performance. Page performance is part of the Google Lighthouse score, so that affects your SEO as well. And we have statistics like a 1% improvement in conversions for every second of site improvement speed. So there's lots of statistics. So there's a cost benefit to removing those tags. As you mentioned, consent is another one. We have fully configurable consent to make sure that you're only getting the IDs from the vendors that you have consent for, and we only send events downstream where we have consent. So we are the gatekeeper for all of that as well. So whether that's GDPR, CCPA, whether it's other data laws, we make sure that you have that data governance in place as well.
All right. So I know you had some slides or at least access to a user environment. And let's share that screen. It's be interesting to take a closer look.
Of course. Let me share my screen right now. So I can talk about MetaRouter. So we are sort of CDI, but we're also calling ourselves a server-side event management platform.
I noticed that on the website, indeed. Yeah.
And that's because we are getting all of the events and putting control into the customer. So I talked about the performance. So the fact that you can remove all of those tags and pixels, speed up your website, improve your SEO, all of that. Then the second part is around addressability. We're getting IDs from Google, from Facebook, Trade Desk, Xandr, and others. We can send that full ID graph into CDP or data warehouse if you're using Composable. And a lot of those IDs are addressable. So we can help improve the anonymous addressability across different ad platforms by using those IDs. So that's
and just to paint a picture for myself. I think I've heard of this technology before, or the possibilities of syncing those IDs. What does that look like from a practical sense? Even with an unknown user, that ID graph is very small. How does it get a match?
So we drop a persistent anonymous ID in the browser, and because we are classed as a strictly necessary cookie, and because we write it as a server-side cookie, that has a rolling 12-month lifespan. So if a visitor comes to the website and then they do behavior and they come back 6 months later, we can track it in CDP as the same anonymous user. But also we're getting the IDs from all of the different vendors. And Pinterest is a good example. We get 2 IDs back from Pinterest. One is their fingerprint ID, so it's just an anonymous. The other is a known hashed ID. So if I'm authenticated in Pinterest on my browser, and then I'm authenticated in Pinterest on my iPad, for example, the ID will match. So when we're sending those IDs into CDP, you're able to do ID resolution across all of those IDs to build a picture. And then you have the Trade Desk ID and the Xandr ID. So you're able to then pass those audiences across using the IDs that they have for matching. And something else that we can help with is view-through attribution. If somebody goes onto your website if somebody goes onto a media website and you've got an advert in there through Xandr, then they come organically to your website. The Xandr ID we get is the Xandr ID that would be on the media website with the advert. So you would be able to tie that somebody saw the particular ad on that particular media site and then didn't click it, but came to your website organically. So you'd be able to tie view-through attribution. So the IDs that we're getting are there for lots of different things. The technology also enables us to get other metadata, so not just IDs. If you want to get like an internal customer ID, or you want to get session information, or for a CDP pulling back segments for personalization, we can pull all of those out in real time and have that as part of our APIs going through the system. So it's quite wide.
Yeah. At the beginning, you mentioned that a MetaRouter doesn't store any data, and the identity graph is stored. I take it doesn't push it into a data warehouse where it can be retrieved at a later stage, or is this kept in a memory?
So it's stored in the user's browser.
In the user browser, okay.
Typically in IndexedDB. So it can either be first-party cookies or IndexedDB. So we store those IDs, and the IDs have an expiry time as well, which is configurable, typically a 30-day lifespan. So that means we'll do a call out asynchronously to get the IDs once every 30 days for the visitor, just helping with that performance piece as well. And then that ID graph is appended to every API that's sent through the MetaRouter platform, as well as all of the consent and all of the behavioral data as well.
Yeah, because I noticed on your on the MetaRouter website, you guys use CookieBot, I believe.
Yes.
Yes. Are those easy integrations to set up with MetaRouter, or is it? Do you have anything proprietary to use?
No, it's very simple. So we work with all. So I can jump into a bit of a
Yeah,
demo
absolutely.
when we have OneTrust implemented. So we basically read the cookie consent that's been stored in the cookie. We decrypt it to pull all of the opt-outs, and then we add that to the payload. And then within the MetaRouter UI, you configure all of the categories. So whether you're using OneTrust or CookieBot, you put in the consent categories, and then that's where we use for matching. So it's very straightforward and very configurable.
Okay, and one of the challenges that I've always found with when working with customer data is allowing users to keep their consent data up to date, or at least updating it at a later stage. I think I had a discussion with this with Brian Clifton, where I'm really surprised about the cookie banners, the consent banners popping up immediately. I mean, okay, that's law, but let's say you reject all. And during the course of your relationship with a specific brand or website, I've never seen it happen before. Brian said he's seen it once before, where they ask the question again. So they show the pop-up banner again. And I think from Brian's story, he said, they try to convince you again to opt in to allow for an even better experience. I mean, I know this doesn't fall under the purview of MetaRouter. This would come back to CookieBot or OneTrust solutions, right?
Yes, that's right. But what we would do is we would have the consents for every single API call that goes through the platform. So if someone comes to the website and, as you say, they accept strictly necessary cookies. So we would start collecting data as soon as they've accepted strictly necessary in GDPR. Then we have those opt-outs. So all of the events going into data warehouse or CDP have all of the opt-outs as true for everything. Then if, as you say, maybe on third visit, they pop up and say, are you sure you want to stay opted out? If they then say, I'll revoke my opt-out and I'll opt in to advertising cookies, then all of the future APIs we're sending in will have the updated consent. So within the data warehouse or the CDP, you can see exactly when consent was changed and manage that appropriately as well. You would have all of the, effectively every sort of row in the CDP would have all of the consent opt-outs with a timestamp. So for looking at sort of how someone's changed consent or when they changed it, you would have all of that as behavioral data within the CDP as well.
Okay. I'll let you find what you were looking for in the...
No worries. So a third area as I've sort of mentioned, data capture, because we're not impacted by browser restrictions. So we're able to collect a much bigger data set into CDP. So unlocking typically sort of 30%. I know there's stats around the globe of ad blocker usage. It's around sort of 40% globally. Some countries like Germany and Poland are in excess of 50%. So if you go to some Polish websites, they say you have to disable your ad blocker for our site to use it. So it is a big issue. So we can help with that.
What are your preferences? I noticed personally that I've been giving consent only to brands that I kind of trust. So I'm not always on the, I do have an ad blocker, but because of the work we do, we usually do a lot of testing as well. So I don't block, I try not to block anything, but I give consent based on indeed the kind of the respect and the trust that I have for brands. What about you personally?
Yeah, I'm similar. So I mean, ad blockers are quite intrusive, and you do find lots of things not working. And even with sort of tools, so I have lots of CDP demo accounts where we are sort of shifting left to the CDP. So sometimes I'm sort of doing a demo thinking, why is the CDP not working? And then I realize it's the ad blocker has blocked some JavaScript. So you end up having to whitelist quite a few. So they can be impactful, but I do feel the same as you. For brands I trust, I will add them to the whitelist, and yeah, consent I'm being a lot stricter with as well.
And you mentioned some of the CDPs being, I know I tried Ghostry. This was many years ago, and I know that at some point they were even blocking, I believe, Google Tag Manager.
That's
or
right.
It was Segment at the time. It was one of those, and it was I mean, doing audit work was horrible because I would just have to take deactivate the plugin itself. What are your experience so far with some of the major CDPs that you see being blocked? I mean, you must be, like you said, you have a lot of these demo accounts, and you must be kind of up to date on what the rejection rates are.
Yeah,
or
so
the block rates. Yeah.
For ad blockers, the majority of CDP tags are blocked, as far as I can see. So I know Salesforce, Lytics, Treasure Data, ZeoTap, all of their tags are blocked by ad blockers. Ghostry is the one that I use for demo purposes as well, because it's got quite a nice UI. I've used uBlock as well, and that was blocking the majority. So it is an issue. And sort of me being at Lytics and Treasure Data, I wasn't aware of the impact. We sort of talked at Treasure Data, particularly around capturing 100% of your data. And that was technically inaccurate, which I didn't realize until I joined MetaRouter and started to look at the impact of ad blockers. So that there are sort of ways around it. And with the sort of CNAME cloaking, people talk about setting up reverse proxies and forwarding everything on, but that's just another management headache that you have.
Yeah, and a lot of these solutions are seeing through that. I know with ITP, the CNAME cloaking doesn't work. It'll still delete your cookies as if it was a third-party cookie.
Exactly.
Or sorry, as a third-party cookie. So it's very worrying to see, but it's nice to hear that MetaRouter has. I mean, it's kind of, you guys are sitting like on a golden egg if that's the case. I'd love to maybe in the future talk about the experiences around the differences in uptake of being able to collect that data. Maybe not 100%, as you said. There is always going to be a way to for users to block any data being sent, but having it all first party sounds interesting.
Exactly, and we're not here to bypass ad blockers. And that's the fourth sort of pillar here, data control. What we're doing is we're putting companies in control of data that they're collecting.
In
So
combination with the consent that the users give, that's the GDPR
exactly.
part. Yeah.
And there was just recently it was classed as a breach. It was a pharmaceutical company in the US called Kaiser, and they had Facebook Pixel, they had Pinterest, they had all of these ad networks running with their pixels on the website, and they didn't realize that patient information was being collected and sent to the ad networks, so across into the US. And
Rings a
that's
bell, yeah.
a big issue. So they're now awaiting a pretty big fine. But what we're talking about is putting control. So if they were using MetaRouter, they would know exactly the data that was being sent to Facebook, the data that's being sent to Pinterest. They can decide whether they want to send that data or not, whether they send it in plain text or they hash it. So that data control is huge. That's really where, so we're not here to bypass ad blockers and sort of make it better for the companies. We're here to enforce consent, to make sure that data that's being collected is data that the user is happy to have collected, and for companies to respect all of the consent that they're using. It's data control is the big pillar, I'd say, of what we do.
And Sitecore recently published a survey, and this was published by David Chan on LinkedIn, where he said that I believe it was 48% of the CMOs now consider security one of the bigger topics for purchasing technology.
Yes.
Is this what you're noticing as well in sales calls? That I don't know if you're dealing more with CMOs or CTOs with a product like MetaRouter, but is this a topic of this discussion you're seeing more often?
It definitely is. And the whole shift to server side, people are understanding sort of the issues. And let me skip over that. So
Sure.
this is what we sort of typically see as an ecosystem. So you have a tag manager like a Telium IQ or Google Tag Manager to manage all of the tags, but all of these tags are firing. So I mentioned the performance impact of that. But then you have the sort of the Kaiser case where you have data being collected and sent. And do you know what these tags are actually collecting and where it's being sent? You have no control over that.
Often not, especially with embedded tracking in them.
Exactly. Then you have the issue of tags can be blocking. So MetaRouter was actually founded because a tag brought down the website in the US for 24 hours and cost them millions in dollars in lost revenue. So they said, we want to remove all of these tags and pixels from our website. We need to get them all off. And the marketing team said, no, we can't do that because we need them. So they then
legendary discussions.
Exactly. So they came to, we have a sister company called Astronomer who were sort of actively doing data pipelining for them. So they asked Astronomer whether they could sort of help them move everything server side. And that's what happened. And then that became MetaRouter as a spin-off. So I was just on a call a few months ago with a very large global bank, and they had a TikTok tag had stopped people from logging in. So it had some sort of interfering code that just stopped the submit button from working. So they had to roll that back. So that's where there's an issue.
Yeah.
So we're pushing to move from this to this. Just have one tag. You're in control of that tag. It's a first party tag. You know exactly what it's doing.
And it's funny that you said that about the TikTok conflict with the submit button. That brings back, I started thinking, how can you solve for these solutions or at least monitor these solutions? And I was like, yeah, T-Leaf could. I mean, this is kind of the solutions that I remember back in the day, like ClickMouse was another one. They got acquired, and you could set up these user paths across the website, including login to that you could do like run every 15 minutes just to make sure that everything stays up and running. I believe they're still around, but
Yes.
wow. Yeah.
So that's a big challenge. So if you remove everything and you can build your own tag to collect and send everything server side, and when you're sending data, as mentioned, it would be a record in DNS pointing at an IP address of the cluster, so not seen as CNAME cloaking. And then you ship those events server side. And you're now in control of everything that you do in this central piece. This is within your infrastructure as well. So all of that data processing is within the region that you want to push that. So I talked about the sort of the IDs that we're collecting. So I'll go through into a bit of a demo. And We have a very large customer of ours based in Poland called Allegro. They have MetaRouter cluster deployed in their GCP in many countries across Europe. So what that means is data processing and data storage is happening within that region. No data is moving outside. So by moving everything server side, you can dictate exactly where that processing occurs. You also then are reducing latency because you have data collection and data forwarding all within the same GCP. So you're not going from one data center to another. So looking at latency, big improvements across the board there as well.
And I take it even on the ad platform level. For instance, Salesforce, you can choose if you want a North American region or an EU region.
Exactly.
You could also dictate that through the location of the MetaRouter instantiation.
Exactly. So when you're setting up integration server side, you're setting up an integration to each and every environment. So it could be Salesforce in 5 regions, and then you attach that to the relevant region. So making sure, again, from latency. So this is what we're pushing. So you have a super tag running or customer's own data layer collecting in the first party. That's not impacted by ad blockers because of the first party nature into a single tenant. Data storage is to the right because this is all done in memory in real time. Then we have all of the IDs that we're getting from that ID graph. We're pulling all of the consents from the CMP. We're doing all of the data transformation because you're moving from having multiple tags sending data down to their system to one tag collecting in a defined schema, but each of these different tools have their own schema. So we have very strong data transformational capabilities and pre-built starter kits for all of the vendors that companies are using to do that data transformation.
How about enrichment? Is that?
Yes, enrichment we can do as part of our sync injector, or we can do enrichment from the cluster itself. So if you want to do a call out, so we're doing this for a large US retailer where they have effectively an anonymous ID that they want to match to a customer ID, but they're not allowed to surface that customer ID to the browser. So the anonymous ID is coming in. We're using that in the cluster to do a call out to their internal API to say, get me the customer ID, and then attach that to the payload before it's then forwarded on. So that's all done server to server. And then making sure that compliance cleanup, which sort of this is what we do. So retrieving all of those user IDs, getting all of the consent opt-outs, we then build that event. That goes into the cluster and we automatically block events going to any opted out vendors. We'll still send everything to internal tools and anything with opt-ins. And what we also have is the ability to block events for bots as well. So the challenge with bots, and we have a large retailer that has in excess of 40% of their web traffic is coming from bots, and we're able to filter that out. And what that means is we're sending less data down to CDP, to data warehouse, and to other tools. So that's saving them money, and it's making sure their analytics are more accurate because you haven't got that 40% skew in the data as well.
Yeah, especially those running on MTU billing. I can imagine bots can be a nightmare in kind of maxing out your monthly allowance.
Exactly. So that's where we can help. I can skip through all of this. So I mentioned we have starter kits or playbooks that have that data transformation. I can show that in a demo, and we have these pre-built integrations. So you'll see a number of CDPs around ActionIQ. We've got Salesforce, the OTAP, Treasure Data, and others in here. So we have those pre-built. So that's where we have a strong partnership with those tools. Good area for server-side and CDIs is data recovery. You will have vendors that go offline. If a vendor goes offline, you can't send data, so you end up with data blind spots. With MetaRouter, what we do is when events come in, if a vendor is offline and we get an error back, we store those events in memory, and then we retry to send those events. And when it comes back online, we'll then resend them. If you have a particularly bad vendor that goes down frequently, you can have those events stored in data warehouse, and we'll read those and send them when the vendor's back online. So just making sure you don't have any data loss. And this is a challenge again with a JavaScript tag, not just ad blockers, but if the end solution APIs go down, you have data blind spots because they're not being sent. By doing it server side, you've got everything stored in memory and then you forward them on. So making sure you don't have any data loss, even if it goes down for 3 seconds.
Yeah. Well, it would be interesting to see the monitoring around this. I know that's kind of always been my pet peeve, is fully understanding what the performance is of data reaching those downstream destinations.
Exactly. And this is showing an end-to-end. If I go back here, so we're collecting data. We also have cross-domain capabilities, so we can provide a persistent cross-domain ID even on top-level domains. We collect those events. We do that call out to get all of the IDs. We integrate with all of the CMPs. We then ship real-time data to CDPs, to data warehouse, to analytics and BI tools. But we can also ship real-time data downstream into CAPIs and other tools where you want to send those events in real time. But we also pass everything into CDPs, and they're able to do audiences and push data out as well. So depending on the use case, we can ship real-time signals, or we can just send everything to CDP for them to pull out. And another focus for us for the next year or so is retail media networks or commerce media networks. So we're able to send data into something like a clean room and make sure it's anonymized and everything's hashed. But what we can also do is help with the retail media network without a clean room. So we have a couple of our customers, what they effectively do is they're setting up a Facebook CAPI account for them and each and every brand. So if we think of, say, Samsung as a brand or an LG as a brand, you have a Facebook account set up for each of those different brands. When events come into us, we have conditional event forwarding. So we can say, what's the brand? And now we need to send those events to the CAPIs for that brand.
Interesting.
And they're then co-owned by the retailer and by the brand. So you can do retail media networks without having to have a clean room or to manage that, and have everything with conditional forwarding. So that's something we're going to be pushing quite heavily over the next few months.
Wow.
With the two different scenarios.
Yeah. But that would take a lot of collaboration between both companies, and wow, a lot of legal aspects to that. Is that something that gets challenged often when you discuss MetaRouter with clients? Is, what is the shared Facebook CAPI accounts?
It's all anonymized data, so it's effectively anonymous. So it's behavioral data. So Facebook know the user because they're dropping that first party cookie when people are doing things. So they go to the retailer, and then the retailer is tracking behavioral data for a brand, sending that into the brand specific Facebook for the brand or the retailer to then do targeting for that anonymous user. So it's completely anonymized. It's just a way to better target advertising across different assets using Facebook or Google Ads based on browse behavior in the retailer. So from a legality point of view, there are no issues because it is anonymous. And if you've sort of opted in to Facebook ads, whatever, then, and you've consented for data being collected, then that's what the tags are there for. So there's no issues from that side.
Here's I don't want to put you on the spot here, but it's a question that it keeps popping up in my mind. When I first heard of MetaRouter, I did compare it to CDP. I was comparing it to, the Lytics, the segment, the M particles, the high touches, etc. And what would be? I mean, there are a few. If you look at the definition of CDPs as set forth by the CDP Institute, you don't have the orchestration, you don't have the audience profile building, data science prediction parts to it, but you're not far from it. What kind of combinations are you seeing happen a lot? Or is it asked quite often? Why would we need MetaRouter when we have, let's say, an M particle?
So some of the, CDP is such a broad term, and
Yeah.
I still think the CDP category needs to be divided up into subcategories, because you have the telium, the segment, the M particle type of CDP that started from data collection and then moved into CDP. Then you've got the Salesforces, the Oracles, the Adobes that were activation and sort of email marketing that moved into CDP. Then you have the sort of core CDPs like a Treasure Data or Lytics. So they're all different. So MetaRouter, yeah, we do have similarities with a segment, with a Telium, with an M particle, but we don't with a number of others that we are partnering very strongly with, like a Treasure Data, ZeoTap, ActionIQ. So because we are that data capture layer and doing it in a first party, there's no overlap because we don't store data. We don't do any ID resolution. We make sure that the CDP is getting the right data at the right time with the right quality, with the IDs to improve all of the ID resolution and with all of the behavioral data that they need to build better algorithms and better activation. So we actually are pushing something quite heavily that we're calling ourselves CDP's best friend. So that's something that we're pushing because we can raise the CDP. And I know there's
and it's admirable. I mean, you guys have been able to keep your hands out of the CDP fire that's raging at the moment.
Exactly.
And I take it you I mean, we saw iTouch do amazing work over the last 18, 24 months but they started as reverse ETL, joked around CDPs, and now they are, they've got the collection, they've got everything now. And that's definitely not on the roadmap for MetaRouter. Or are you guys kind of, sitting on the top of the ledge, watching the arena and how things are developing in CDP land, kind of staying out of it?
So I know my founders have openly said that we're never going to be a CDP. We don't want to store data. Data storage has its own challenges because
absolutely, yeah.
When you need to have permission, you need to make sure you have the security there. So that's something that they've openly said. And that's why we are partnering with CDPs to make sure that you're getting the most. And you mentioned high touch and pushing composable and talking around that side, and the fact that sort of friends wouldn't tell friends to buy a CDP.
Yeah.
We're unlocking the CDP, so making sure that the investment that you've made with the CDP, you're getting the most from it, because CDPs are very much a sort of garbage in, garbage out. And if you don't use the CDP, you get no value from it. Where I worked at sort of Cyan platforms and you're sort of doing authentication on the website, that's very sticky as a platform. Once someone's put authentication in, you've got your own hashing algorithms for password, you've got everything wired up. You're pretty sticky. A CDP is pulling data from other systems, centralizing it, and then doing activation. But you technically don't need a CDP. You can do everything yourself. The CDP makes life easier and allows you to sort of elevate your marketing, but it's easy to switch off if you're not getting value. So we want to make sure that the CDPs are being utilized in the right way, that you are getting value, and that people aren't getting sort of sent personalized emails that are irrelevant to them, which is affecting a brand. Or we've all had it where you go onto a website, you're browsing a product, and then the following day you get an advert for the product you were browsing, but you actually purchased it, but they haven't suppressed you from that. And that infuriates me when I do that. Just, it's so simple to do.
Especially around Black Friday when they come with the offers and you just purchased it a week before.
Exactly. And what a waste of ad spend. And it seems lazy to the company. So the fact that we can help with the CDP, put those signals in, we can do real-time suppression. So as soon as someone has made a purchase, we'll send that event to the CDP, but we'll also send it to the walled gardens. So you're immediately suppressed from advertising that product. So it's just making sure that data is flowing to help customer experience. But going back to your question, I say my founders have vowed we will never be a CDP. We want to partner with all of the CDPs and be the data collection layer or into data warehouse for composable. And we will never store data. That's not part of our future plans at all. We will just pass events in real time.
Yeah. Interesting. This is going to be an interesting development. I think, 2025, I think Forrester announced it's going to be the make or break year for many CDPs. I mean, we've seen ActionIQ getting acquired, and David Rabb recently in an article discussing or giving at least 3 points of view. They had to be acquired because cash flow was not getting any better. It wasn't bad, but it's just maybe not getting any better. So there's a whole lot of things going to be happening. But I just see you guys. I see this arena of all these CDP vendors kind of fighting it out together, and you guys are just sitting on the sideline or in the bleachers with a box of popcorn, just saying, "Okay, go ahead and sort it out. We've got our thing here."
The other thing which the CDP vendors probably won't like me saying too much is we are agnostic to a CDP. So the challenge you have is just say, if you've spent a year implementing a CDP, you've got your website tagged up, you're collecting events, and then a year later you decide maybe it wasn't the right CDP. We now need to go out to market. Maybe we bought from a Forrester or a Gartner recommendation that wasn't the best recommendation.
Facepalm, yeah.
What we enable you to do is to just in our UI to switch CDP. You've tagged your website with MetaRouter, you're collecting behavioral data. If you want to do a pilot, so just say you're looking at 3 vendors, you just enable them all in our UI, send the same data to all 3 CDPs, have a play, see which one you prefer, and then you just switch off the others. So to give you that agnostic nature, and it's not just for CDPs.
And that's a great foot in the door for any company looking for a CDP, saying, hey, start with MetaRouter. They'll help you with the assessment, get all your tagging in place, choose 3 that are on your short list, send data to try them out, and then just keep one.
Exactly. And that's exactly what Allegro did. So
Oh, really?
We've done some events with them talking about how they put the CDI before the CDP.
Yeah.
Secondly, you need to make sure you have quality. You don't want to just collect data, send it into a CDP, then start looking at data quality because you've got poor signal in there. So make sure you have the data quality first, then choose the CDP.
Yeah.
So that's the key. And because we have our data replay capabilities.
Yeah.
So
would that work towards a CDP as well then?
So what we can do is we can store data in a data warehouse. That could be stored for 3 months. Then when you've got your CDP up and running, we'll read those events and forward them all on. So you don't have to have the CDP in place. You can be collecting data while you're getting the CDP all configured. So from that side, we can help.
And you mentioned Allegro actually taking this approach, the CDI first approach.
Yes.
When you talk, I mean, this is also an ongoing discussion in the community. Who owns something like who owns customer data? Is it marketing or is it technology, engineering? And when you spoke to Allegro and potentially other customers, are you mostly talking to CMOs or CTOs or CDOs, or what kind of departments are involved?
Yeah, so that's sort of shifting. I mean, traditionally it's been the CTOs and the tech people because it's tag removal and you tag the website to collect data. But because of the outcomes, that was one of the slides I skipped over, with sort of getting an improvement in ROAS and a reduction in this and improvement in all of your advertising. We are seeing CMOs more seeing the benefit. So that conversation is shifting. And as we're working more and more with CDPs, we are white labeled in a number of CDPs at the moment. So we're sort of under the covers doing that already. So as those partnerships are growing, then we'll see more and more sort of CMOs looking at what we're doing with the levers. So shifting from a tech sale to a marketing sale.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow. I like the whole CDI first approach thing. That's something I want to dive in a little, or at least start considering in upcoming projects.
Exactly, and not just for CDP, but if you're using personalization engine or your email platform, you can just shift.
Yeah, but that's always been the argument with. I remember when I was doing segment implementations, one of the arguments was saying, "Hey, you can send to, let's say, Mixpanel, but if you don't like what Mixpanel has to offer, you can go ahead and try Amplitude. We can do a replay of all the data that you've collected for, let's say, the last 6 months, pump it into Amplitude, and then you'll be able to test Amplitude as if it's been collecting data for months on end already. But you guys are taking it even a step, more to the left, which opens up a whole new kind of possibilities.
Exactly. And I was chatting to a very large media company recently, and you have other challenges internally as well. So they purchased a new tool, very excited. It took 6 months to get IT to create the DNS record that was needed and to approve a tag being deployed. So they had 6 months where they couldn't do anything. With MetaRouter, once MetaRouter is on the website and you've got everything being collected, I do have slides which I didn't show in here. It's sort of talking about an analogy of water cleansing. When somebody's building a new housing estate, you don't sort of do all of the water filtration on each and every property. You do it once, you centralize it, and then you just attach all of the houses and apartments. You then attach all of the sinks and taps and toilets to that. But you know that each and every property is getting clean water. That's how we help as well. So data cleansing is here. If somebody purchases,
I mean, even the business case would be easy. I don't have insights into the pricing around MetaRouter, but I can imagine if you're buying an enterprise size solution, you can't run it for 6 months. take that money that you effectively have not been able to gain a return on, compare that to what something like MetaRouter would cost, it would be an easy discussion.
Exactly. And that's where we can help. So we enable sort of investment in these tools to be immediate. I mean, it's just ticking a couple of boxes and you've got data flowing through. So that's how quick and easy it is. Did you want me to go into a demo?
Yeah, let's share. Let's.
Time. So this is the UI that we have. So I mentioned we sort of work with clusters. So a cluster would be a deployment sort of in a particular region. So it could be Berlin versus London versus New York. So wherever you want that cluster to be. Then within the clusters, you have one or more pipelines. So a pipeline, just think of your mains water coming in at home. You have one pipe coming in, and then your plumber connects all of the sinks, taps, everything else. So whether it's a dev test and prod cluster, or whether it's Germany, UK, US, that's all configurable. For this demo, I have this one pipe coming in, and we're sending data in real time to all of these different tools. The first thing that we mentioned is consent. So you can just put in consent categories in here. So if you have category 4, 5, 6, whatever the human readable name, so you build up all of those consents.
That would be a payload variable or a payload parameter.
Yeah, so the consent categories that you work with the CMP. And what you'll see is every integration has a consent category assigned to it. So it's just a matter of mapping everything in here. So that's where we can do the enforcement. What we also have is, I mentioned Sync Injector. So as part of Sync Injector, the first thing is whether you're looking at implied consent or explicit consent. Implied consent means MetaRouter runs as soon as someone hits the website, and if somebody opts out, then we'll stop running if they opt out of all cookies. With explicit consent, when someone hits the website, we don't fire until someone accepts strictly necessary cookies. It's very simple. Then
I think the explicit one is the legally smart option.
That's the GDPR versus
that's the GDPR,
CCPA.
Yeah.
So CCPA,
CCPA is implied. Okay.
Yes, that's where the difference is. So, but however it's running, we can support that. Then this is where we do the syncs. So you mentioned, again, we have to have consent to do those syncs. So you just go in for every sync that we're doing. And these are based on a customer's own tags effectively. So for Google G tag, this would be the website's G tag ID. So the IDs we're getting back from those vendors are, as I mentioned, the IDs that their tags would generate in a first-party cookie, but we're doing this through our patented Sync Injector. We have parameters, as mentioned, for things like cookie lifespan. Do we want to use advanced consent mode?
So that basically simulates the triggering of the JavaScript receiving the payload back, which would include the GID, the Google user ID, I believe the value is called,
yes.
But without it actually firing off in the user's browser, thereby protecting the end user.
Yes.
But you still capture wow, okay.
And we do that for a number of vendors. And we also get the click IDs. So that's part of the payload that we can get. Then, if I scroll down, you'll see we have lots and lots and lots. And then if I go to the very bottom, you can do custom syncs. So a lot of CDIs will say we can do cookie syncing. But as mentioned, if the tag's never fired because of an ad blocker, the cookie's never set. So you can't do cookie syncing. So our Sync Injector will be able to get IDs.
And this is in general availability right now, the Sync Injector?
Yes, it's been around for 6 years.
6 years? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so
sometimes you post stuff on LinkedIn and I'm like, does it just get released or is it old already? Okay, 6 years. Interesting.
So we've just, in the last week, we've released RTB House. So we're constantly adding more in here. With a custom identity sync, we can do like an API call out, syncing, anything else. So this is where all of the IDs are then built. So if I jump across here as an example, this is just for demo purposes, but this is the anonymous ID that we drop persistent for a rolling 12 months. We have that cross-domain ID that's generated. It can be across top-level domains. This does rely on third-party cookies, so not all browsers will support it. People using Chrome, we can try to get that cross-domain ID as well. This is an example of a fetch sync to get a customer ID, and here's the IDs we're getting from the vendors for this particular site. So we have no Facebook tag, Pinterest tag, Xandr, or anything running on here. We don't have Google running, but we're getting all of these IDs back. And then
That's interesting, Neill. I've it's been a long time setting up this call with you, but being able to actually see this is a nice eye opener, and I think will resonate with a lot of marketing people.
Yeah, that's good. And then we have the integration with OneTrust, so we're just visualizing that in here as well. So I don't know if you'll have any sort of technical listeners on the call, but if I just go in here as a network tab, if I click in here, we have different events that are firing. So we front analytics tools, GA4, Adobe. So we have a full analytics specification. So a P is a page tag that's firing, and this is the payload. So we always have the context, integrations, properties.
Yeah, these are very common with other CDPs. I think this is what really makes you look like a CDP.
And yeah, similarities with Segment. We're both using analytics.js.
Okay.
So we have all of the consent opt-outs in here. I've opted into everything, so they're all false. Then information around the page. Then we have that full provider graph. So if I go into Google GTag, it's not just the GA ID. We're getting the session ID, session counts as well.
Pinterest, even the session count. Okay.
All of that's coming back. For Pinterest, we're getting the epic and the unauth. So all of that's part of the payload. And then the properties is around the type of event. So this is a product list viewed. So in here,
where is that session count stored? For instance, is that in the client's browser? Well, I mean, yes. With Sync Inject, you're picking it up on MetaRouter side, and then you're storing it in the user's browser, but not in a way that it would trigger a actual call because the gtag.js is not on the customer's website. Right?
That's right. So we're storing. So as part of the configuration in here, if I go up to advanced settings, you can store in IndexedDB or browser cookies. So for this demo, we're storing everything in IndexedDB. So in here, we have all of the different IDs. This is movable ink with the value. So everything's stored. So these are the Google parameters in here. So everything's stored in the browser and then appended into all of the events that are going through. So we can track anything. So this is an add to cart or product added event. So all of these events are coming in. And as mentioned in here, we're using this pipeline here. We're sending events in real time. So if I jump over to GA4, we have all of these events coming in. Here's that men's belt, the Boss Surge leather belt that I'm looking at in here. So everything is being sent real time without anything running. We're also sending the ID graph into GA4 for this example. So if I click in here, here's the Trade Desk ID 546 at the beginning.
And this is just for demo purposes. There's no real operational use behind this.
Exactly, for demo purposes. So we can send all of those events in. If I go in here and if I revoke consent for targeting and performance cookies, if I refresh the page, two things happen. The first is we drop all of those IDs because we now don't have consent. Secondly, if I look at the context in here, we have opt-outs true for 002 and 004. So within here, in fact, I can show it in this pipeline view, 002 and 004 is performance and targeting cookies. So we're now not sending any events to GA4 and to other tools. So if I start hitting the website, let me go into something else. Hit a few more pages in here and go in. Let's go into the cart as well. So we're now suppressing events going down to GA4. So we have no events coming in here. If I go into something like Google BigQuery, and this is an example for composable CDP as well. If I run it without highlighting on there, we're still passing all the events into the data warehouse because in our Google BigQuery, that's classed as a strictly necessary cookie. So in here, we have the anonymous ID, the domain, the path, the page title. We have all of the IDs in here, so cross-domain ID. But you'll see here, we don't have the Facebook tag, the Google tag, and others. That's because we have that opt-out as true. Here, where I did have consent, we have opt-ins as true. We have those IDs. But what we have are the sent and received timestamps. So we can see exactly when somebody revoked consent or gave consent. And if you have a look at the difference in the sent and received, that's milliseconds. So we are sending everything across in real time. So we can just make sure that we don't have sort of any issues with consent. If I confirm back in here, and let's just go into a few more pages in here, that will now start sending events. So there's a little bit of a latency with GA4, but if we give it a couple of seconds, you'll see all of the events flowing in here in server side. You'll see where I'm located and all the other information. And to show how simple it is, we have all of these pre-built integrations. So if we pick Salesforce CDP as an example, we create that. We have
Is it still called that?
No, it's Data Cloud. We need to update this. So we've had integrations for 6 years before naming. So we're in here. So Salesforce Data Cloud. You have the client identifier, API name, all of the parameters that you need to send event server side. So I just need to go in here and add all of these. And I did pick one with too many parameters. But by doing this, all you need to do is set up the connections. We have the pre-built playbook that's done. So I save this as revision 1 now. We then
that's nice too that you have version control as well.
The full version control. Then we have global parameters. So these are parameters that are appended to every event that's sent through. So we're passing our anonymous ID, and we're doing a direct assign of timestamp. Then we have event specific. So we're sending page events, order completed, product viewed. So if I go into product list viewed, we're sending the list ID, we're sending the category, and we're sending the event ID in there. That's all that's required. Just say we want to send
these are very specific for, like you said, this is the Analytics.js events.
As an input schema, yes.
But you're not limited to it.
Not at all. We're completely agnostic. So this is properties.listID. Just say it's LI in your data layer. So we have the pre-built mappings in here. So as I said, I can go in here, I can add in my parameters. I've got this saved. I can just deploy this and events will flow in straight away. That's how quick and easy it is to do that. If you want to capture more, so just say we want to capture video played events, we can just clone from another event. Then we can start to add in different things. So we can say it's input.video ID is my input key, but our output key is VID in there. So we can do a simple mapping. In here, we can do sort of case sensitivity. We can make sure it's a Boolean, not a string. We can do hashing. All of that can be done in the UI in here.
Wow, nice.
If I just jump across to, let's go into GA4 is a good one to show. We can do things like global filtering. So this is basically saying don't send any events that are of these types down to GA4. We can do filtering by parameters. So we could say if we have a user ID, send the event, otherwise we don't. It could be based on a Boolean flag, so any of that filtering happens. Then we have expressions, and we use a form of SQL called Lua. That's used by gaming companies because it's very fast. We have some of our large companies sending tens of thousands of events per second, and all of the transformation logic and forwarding is all happening in real time. So in here, you can do anything that you would do in SQL. So this is getting the Google Click ID, splitting it on the decimal point and taking the third part of the array, because that's what they require in the gclid. The dclid is slightly different. If I go into order completed and go into this multi-key here, this is basically getting the array of products that have been purchased and creating an item in the event called items and forwarding that on. That's all of this logic. So you have almost limitless transformation capabilities.
But here's another question though. Looking at this, I mean, who is your target market? Of course, you mentioned a lot of enterprise-sized companies, but as I mentioned in earlier videos of mine, I do see need for small and medium-sized companies to get their act together. There is no excuse for not working properly with customer data. MetaRouter also be one of the parts of the solution that they should consider. And I don't know around pricing. So I've seen CDPs offer SMB pricing, but is MetaRouter also actively pushing in that market?
So not actively. I mean, there are other sort of CDI type tools that are more SME focused, I would say. And part of the challenge is we are fully private cloud. So we need to have a dedicated cluster for every single company. We're not a multi-tenant SaaS where we can say, here you go, we'll set up a pipeline. We have floated the idea because we are in the process of building a Shopify plugin that enables full event collection, fully server-side, so not a single bit of JavaScript, hooking into the Shopify APIs and sending events to GA4, to Facebook, and doing it server-side.
Going to take little data, giving them a run for their money.
Yeah. And by doing that, we're talking about having like a pipeline per customer, because they don't need to go into the UI. All of that would be all automated. So going into more of a sort of SME type of price point for that. We used to have a cloud version when we were first set up 6 years ago. We've moved away from that because data residency, data processing, being fully first party is our mantra. So having that dedicated cluster for each and every customer, which means
only makes sense.
Price point for SMEs. We offer a full white glove service as well. So where you have server-side Google Tag Manager, you have to set up a cluster and manage everything yourself. We do all of that on behalf of our customers. So our SRE team will deploy, will monitor, will do upgrades and everything. Offering that service sort of pushes us into the enterprise arena, because of the fact we need SRE support for every customer that we have, and just making sure everything's running. In the future, I could see us moving into the SME space. I think we have sort of full RBAC in here as well, so user management on sort of roles. We have the notion of organizations as well. So we could effectively do that. And also with some of our partners that we have, almost a reseller agreement where they purchase the cluster from us. We manage everything, but they set up and manage all of the pipelines on behalf of their customers.
Interesting too.
So that's something that we're pushing. And then we can
go into
hear
SME very flexible, at least.
Definitely. So that's sort of us in a nutshell, is sort of the ease of integrations, the pre-built playbooks, the fact that you can sort of do any data manipulation in flight, the tracking anything, the full analytics spec. So just
I'll tell you one thing, Neill. It's been very interesting seeing this, and I've seen most of the CDP platforms on the market today. Most of them, not all. I'm kind of ashamed, call me naive, for kind of shoving MetaRouter under that label too. But I definitely see that you guys are in a category of your own. You mentioned it at the beginning of the call, or of the recording, that you're considering of actually generating or creating that category because you stand out so much from the CDP category. And it's great to hear that you guys play well with everyone in the industry as well. And it's just, you've given me some inspiration around what happens to the left of that CDP. And I think there's definitely room for a lot of improvement, especially on first-party tracking that you showed, and also the sync injector part. It gets really interesting. So what does 2025 look for? I know that you have a webinar coming up today around AI.
Yes.
How does that kind of incorporate into the story of MetaRouter?
Yeah, so AI and data quality. So it's where I sort of mentioned earlier around sort of the new sort of AI tools that are now surfing the web and bringing in data from there, and all of the fake news that spread. That the data quality is so important for that. So when we're sending data into something like a Google BigQuery, just making sure that you have everything in the right format. We can do the filtering to make sure you're not sending signal noise. So data quality for AI is really important. And the other thing, as mentioned, is around retail media networks. So being able to sort of activate. So we're able to sort of pull from something like a BigQuery, send events back through MetaRouter, and then we forward it on, in this example, to Facebook events. So sort of closing that loop. So the IDs that we're pulling back are being forwarded on. So that whole sort of retail media or commerce media network is going to be a big push for us in 2025 as well.
Very interesting. Well, thank you very much for your time today. I know it's kind of we've gone in all possible tangents here. We've gone from just talking to getting a full-on demo. So I'll have to kind of figure out how I'll split that up. But it's been very interesting, and thank you a lot for your time today.
My pleasure. It's been great.